This is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist and nutritional blood microscopist, and I'm going to get started on today's weekly educational podcast. Today is Monday, January 24th, and this is podcast number 114. This podcast is going to be on something called phytic acid. That's P-H-Y-T-I-C, phytic acid. And the link here is for diabetes. It would also be good to know how we get phytic acid and what the potential problems are. So bear with me. I'm going to go into a little bit of chemistry first before getting into the true applications. So phytic acid is similar to a molecule called inositol, and I'm going to be getting to inositol, but inositol is this link for diabetics, and it's something for them to be concerned about. So phytic acid, similar to inositol. Now, the phytic acid is actually a storage form of phosphorus in plants. So this is how plants store the mineral phosphorus. Typical plants with a lot of phytic acid are bran, nuts, seeds, and legumes. So pretty much a lot of the things that we eat, legumes are going to be like beans. Nuts and seeds are something we're supposed to be eating, at least a handful a day. I do warn people not to eat more than a handful of nuts and seeds per day, and you're going to learn why real soon. Now, the problem with this phytic acid is it binds to calcium, iron, and zinc in our bodies. So these are important minerals, calcium, iron, and zinc. We've heard of all of them, right? Calcium for lowering acidity, iron, which gives us oxygen transport in our blood, and zinc. Everyone's heard about zinc and its relationship not only to reproductive activity, but also our immune systems. So these three minerals get inhibited. So when phytic acid binds to them, they're not available for absorption in our bodies, and the absorption would normally occur in our small intestine, and then that's not going to occur if there's too much phytic acid. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem for acidity, that's a problem for oxygen transport, and that's a problem for our immune system. Going back into a little chemistry, so we need an enzyme called phytase to unlock this phosphorus, essentially to break down the phytic acid. If you remember, all enzymes, or most enzymes, end in ASE, so phytase enzyme is going to be linked to phytic acid. Now, most animals, such as livestock, they can't utilize this enzyme. They don't have this enzyme. So the phytic acid and all this locked up phosphorus passes through them. And remember, these animals are feeding on grains and bran, but typically grains, and grains are high in phytic acid. So this livestock that's eating grains, another reason grain-fed animals aren't the best way to go. So the phytic acid that's in the grains, the animals cannot unlock the phosphorus, so there's too much phosphorus in the manure. That's pretty much a side issue with respect to us, but it does become an environmental issue. For us, we can consume phytic acid when we eat the bran, nuts, and seeds, and legumes, and grains. But it's also synthesized inside our cells when phosphate reacts with inositol. So now I'm back to that inositol. The issue here is that when our body makes inositol, it makes it from glucose, and this is done in our kidneys. So if we are making inositol, then that's a way to burn up glucose, to utilize glucose. But what if we don't need the phytic acid, which would normally be made by phosphate inositol plus inositol. If we don't need the phytic acid, then that glucose in our kidneys does not get burned. That's the link to the diabetics. Now, foods that are very high in phytic acid that we typically consume, the highest ones are hemp, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, Brazil nuts. Now, Brazil nuts are great for selenium, which is good for our immune system. I always recommend you eat a few Brazil nuts a day for your immune system, and also beans, which are legumes. So the problem and all this phytic acid can be minimized with heat, but we normally don't heat our hemp and pumpkin seeds and Brazil nuts. So if the nuts we're consuming have been roasted, then the problem is minimized. But if we're consuming raw nuts, another thing I tell people not to do, we're going to be consuming too much of this phytic acid. So if nuts and seeds are roasted without salt, they're much easier to digest, and one of the reasons is it reduces the phytic acid. It breaks it down. So again, the link to diabetes is through inositol. If we're getting phytic acid from our food, then there's no need to utilize the glucose in our kidneys to make inositol, and that's the problem. So if you're a diabetic, decrease your seed, nuts, and bean intake, or make sure they're cooked. Okay, but either way, decreasing the intake should improve your blood sugar. Now, I was essentially introduced to this whole concept from a Native American friend of mine who is diabetic, and he's been working for a few years trying to figure out how he can eliminate his diabetes with food. And he's been doing many, many different things, and he found this link to phytic acid. He shared it with me, and I looked into it to figure out, well, why would beans and why would nuts hurt a diabetic? Because these are the typical foods someone would eat in a vegetarian type diet or even a keto diet. So why would this be a problem for diabetics? And the link is through the inositol, right? So if there's too much phytic acid in our system, there's no need for us to make the inositol from glucose. So that's the big issue here. Now, there is another way that diabetics can really reduce their problems, and this is linked to something known as the zone. I've talked about zone eating a lot. If you remember, eating in the zone, this is a word coined by Barry Sears. You would consume your meals in this ratio of macronutrients. For every 3 grams of protein, 4 grams of carbohydrates, and 1 gram of fat. So this ratio would be the zone. So if I multiply all of the numbers by, say, 5, it would be 15 grams of protein for every 20 grams of carbohydrates, for every 5 grams of fat. So you notice there are no zeros here. There's no 0 carbohydrates. There's no 0 fat. It is a perfect ratio. But there's never been a food or supplement or some sort of a powder that you could mix in water that gave you that ratio until now. And if you're interested, I will share that with you. Just drop me a phone message or a text message or an email. So this product is made by someone I know, and I have no financial interest in this product, but I'd like to help people that are diabetic because this is essentially a meal replacement. This is something you can put a scoop in some water, and your sugar levels will decrease for 4 hours. And during those 4 hours, what you're going to be doing is burning fat. So this meal replacement is really perfect for diabetics or anyone wanting to burn fat for energy for the next 4 hours. So if there's interest, I will share that. And that's all I have for this podcast, fairly short. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Please leave a comment, and I do read all of the content, all of the comments. All right, bye now.